Time. We've got our final panel with our great friends at BXC and GBBC, our friends from Ripple. Thank you for joining us. Please join us up on stage. Let's get moving. We're going to dig into, let me switch over here. Whoops. Oh, shit. Yep, excuse me. Diana, can you fix your computer real fast? Sorry. I don't know. I just accidentally touched it. No, it's, yeah. All right, please, pull up a chair, get comfy. How many do you need? Are you 3 or 4? Okay, great. Let me get... So great story. Last time Meghan and I were together, I think it was in Dubai, and not to downplay whatever's going to happen here, but it was what was the panel name? It was...
Blockchain catalyzing climate finance at scale.
Yes, but either way, it was arguably one of the funnest panels that I had been on, just because there was a raucous energy that she led. So to do this at close to 5 is probably going to be a thing, but that was a great memory and far away from here. And so thank you for still holding that space today. So anyhow, welcome. Please introduce yourself, your guests, and we'll get moving.
Okay. That's okay, great. And Dave sells himself short. He actually actively gave our panelist wine on that panel. So let's see if we can recreate that today. No, I'm just kidding. Hi, my name is Meghan. I work at Ripple. A show of hands, just really quick. How many of you have heard of Ripple? R-I-P-P-L-E. Yeah, great. I should hope so. Well, welcome. I lead carbon investments there, and I also work on our net zero strategy. So, sorry, lots of cameras and phones, fun. Our net zero strategy, we've got a commitment to be decarbonized fully by 2030, and we achieve that in a number of ways, one of those ways being purchasing carbon credits, which is quite potentially, where you're coming from, whatever angle, might be a bit controversial. So how many of you, also just quick show of hands, how many of you are familiar with carbon credits? Okay, just about as many of you as I expected. That's great. Okay, right. So when Ripple committed to being net zero by 2030, we looked at our decarbonization plan and realized very quickly that we're a financial tech services company. We work in the space that we don't have our own massive supply chain, so the majority of our emissions do come from Scope 3 and our supply chain partnerships. And because of that, those are really hard to abate emissions. And we've tried everything we can at the moment around reducing on Scope 1 and 2, bringing renewable energies into the market. But ultimately, a lot of what we currently do today in our strategy relies on purchasing high integrity, quality offsets that we hope one day and expect will be able to be used as allowances under compliance schemes, which we're increasingly subjected to. And why am I giving you all of this context? So one of the big problems in the carbon market, especially if you've all heard of carbon credits, is the amount and surplus of data, the lack of integrity, lack of trust. There has been number of reports written in the New Yorker, in the Guardian, about how carbon offsets are potentially a sham and a scam, and we certainly don't think so, but we do think and can admit that there's a massive data integrity problem. And right now there's just a lot of noise around all of the data in the market. So the conversation we're going to be having today focuses on the data side of carbon markets, on the amount of data, on packaging up that data. And so the two people here with me are very well versed to speak on that, and I'm excited for them to engage with you here. So to my left, we have Bonnie. Bonnie works, she leads climate intelligence. She's principal for climate intelligence in carbon markets at the Rocky Mountain Institute, RMI. And then we have James Walker over there, who's the co-founder of Centigrade, which we'll get into. Centigrade is a collaborative company that RMI and Ripple worked on, and has a very nice take on solving for some of the data issues in the carbon markets. So I think my first question to each of you is, you're coming at this from very different angles and history on your experience in both in climate and on data. Bonnie, I wonder if you can first start. I mean, you've you come from a background of conservation. You've worked in marine research. You've worked at Microsoft. Bonnie actually led AI for Earth here at Microsoft and was involved in the team that built the world's first planetary computer, which is très cool. And so I wonder, now that you're at RMI and you're focusing on carbon markets data, kind of a different side to environmental data, if you can tell us your thoughts on some of the data trends you're seeing, or what do you make of the current state of data in the carbon market?
Yeah, thanks so much, Meghan. And first of all, I'm really excited that Microsoft let me back into the building today. This was like the first time making it back to the New York office, and I was like, great, I'm back in, it's all good. But yeah, Meghan, I would say that I've had taken on some very different roles across my career, but the through line through all of the different roles that I've had is really, how could we use high quality data so that we can make decisions that are actually environmentally impactful? And so whether that is working on creating sustainable fisheries in Myanmar, or whether that is designing geospatial AI for being able to make environmental decisions, all of this is really rooted in, we want to be able to use the data in a way that we could work on advancing for the planet. And so now in my current role, looking at the carbon market system, wow, do we have an interesting data challenge to tackle here. We have a very fragmented and complex data landscape where, if you want to really understand what is the performance of a carbon credit that's available for you to buy, you have to look at a number of very different data sources. You could be looking at the project design document. There's multiple different third-party players and service providers in the system that could layer on other data. There's ratings agencies that are providing ratings. And so as you're sort of navigating this landscape and you're trying to figure out, how do I actually approach this? How do I actually use the data to figure out what to buy? I think that's really what we're trying to work on at RMI, is really figuring out, how could we work on surfacing data in a way that's actually useful and usable. Having a lot of quantity of data actually isn't helpful if you're not able to use it in a way that's easy. And so we actually want to have usable data in the system. And we also want to really think about how to have it in a framework that is standardized and you could actually use, depending on the type of project you're interested in. It could have very different methodologies that's behind it. And so it could be very difficult to actually understand how you compare one project to another. And so how could you actually bring some standardization into the system so you really could work across a variety of different projects as you're building out your portfolio? And I would say another sort of like personal piece that I'm really excited about is that carbon credits, even though the first word is carbon, and that's oftentimes the major piece that people are focusing on because that's what the accounting is based on, the projects actually could have a broad range of social environmental impact as well, whether that's biodiversity or community impacts or water impacts. And I think that's something that we're really looking at too, is making sure that the data for this broad range of other social environmental factors also is part of the standardization process, and it's not a focus on carbon alone.
Yeah, I really like that last bit, because oftentimes, at least in carbon credits, these are pieces of data that honestly, they're not getting credit for. I hate to use the word credit there, but this is kind of like supplemental throwaway data, and it's actually quite a co-benefit, and it comes at actually a guaranteed a higher price often too. So there's, additional income to these kind of scenarios. I wonder, James, you come at this from a different angle on data, and Bonnie, I liked your comment around usefulness, because then I think of how the data is utilized in the carbon market. And so James, you're coming at this from, you've spent years working with in kind of growth stage startups on automation and how people are working around data in different infrastructures. I wonder, now that you've had a chance to kind of look under the hood of the VCM over the last 12, 18 months, is the data challenge too much? Are we kind of doomed, or do you see that there's some solutions in sight? And yeah, I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, thanks, Meghan. It's definitely a challenge. The thing that's most surprising is how analog the data is, right? So the data exists, but it exists in PDFs and Word docs and Excel sheets, and therefore is not useful, right? So you guys were talking about usefulness earlier. In order to make it useful, you've got to digitize it. So that's something we've been focused on at Centigrade. We partnered with RMI to build a framework, a common framework, to be able to evaluate these projects, set a standard, if you will, to enable the market to be able to compare and contrast the projects and ultimately determine which projects they're interested in and want to buy. So for us, the process began with digitizing the methodologies themselves. Each of these methodologies, if you haven't seen them, are 50 to 200 pages. Mostly complex mathematical equations, that are hard to make sense of. And so we digitize the methodologies, put them online so that you can interact with them through a UX that even a layperson could make sense of. And so once we did that, then we began to onboard the projects themselves. And so our mission as a company is to get projects online so they can tell their fully differentiated story to the market, number one. And then number two, we want to make it easy for them to work with service providers that they have to work with in order to bring their credits to market. And then ultimately, number three, we want to make it easy for buyers to discover and diligence projects all in one place, which up until now has not been possible. If you talk to buyers, that's one of the most painful parts of the process, is the fact that they have to access data, multiple sources, multiple formats, and it's a very painstaking process. And so we're working to dramatically simplify that for buyers so they can do it all on Centigrade. I think ultimately what we want to have happen is we want to turn carbon credits into assets that people want to buy, right? The universe of people who are buying them is not huge right now, but I think once people trust that they are buyable assets, whether that's buy to retire, buy to hold, buy to trade, buy to sell, we want all kinds of investors and buyers to come into the market, and the way you do that is through data, and so that's what we're focused on.
Yeah, I really can vouch for that buyer piece, because as someone who has diligence projects before, I'll give my favorite anecdote, which is we invested in a mine methane capture project over in, based in California, but working on Appalachian mines. And when we were in the diligence phase, they gave us access to their data room, because that's one of the things that a supplier will often give you access to for counterparty risk and some other bits of information. And it was I want to say it was around 300 document page data room. And one of the things that was included was like a poster from a children's project that they launched, like a children's prize project that they launched. So there's also just a surplus of like manual analog data that suppliers have, and they don't know what data is actually needed for buyers to connect with them. Which RMI recently launched a buyer's guide to data quality in the carbon. I'm butchering the name. Carbon credit data quality. But we were talking about this a bit earlier today about kind of packaging up the right sets of data for buyers, because buyers are inundated with all of these things. I wonder if you can chat with us a little bit more. I think something that stuck out to me in that report was focusing on the buyer's journey and investigating the right pieces, which definitely the Centigrade team is focused on as they build out their product as well. So curious if you can share some of those report findings.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for us, one of the pieces that we realize is like, well, if we really want to be able to build out a more trusted carbon market system, one piece is making sure that you have high quality supply in the system. So you actually want to be able to push out more data on carbon credits so you could understand and differentiate what is performing well in the system from what is performing poorly, and you would hope that there is greater demand for what is performing well. But that hypothesis only holds true if you have buyers in the system who are informed enough so that they actually know how to interpret that data and actually make their purchase decisions on that data, and so they are preferencing what is higher quality in the system. And so I think that's one of the pieces. You just spoke about your personal buyer experience. We spoke with a lot of buyers. It can be an incredibly difficult, challenging process to navigate as they're trying to figure out what to buy. And so RMI, we walked through and we sort of laid out, these are a number of the important steps for you when you're looking at how you incorporate carbon credits as part of your sustainability strategies overall. First, you actually do want to strategize. You want to make sure that you have an overall corporation or organization sustainability strategy for how you want to do the decarbonization. If carbon credits play a role in that, you want to be able to identify what are the important carbon credit attributes that you really want to watch out for. And so there's a lot of guidance in the system now, and I think the carbon markets as a whole are really coalescing around some of these major quality criteria, such such as ICVCM and their core carbon principles that they put out. And so great, there's some guidance out there for how do you actually identify these important quality attributes. But where RMI saw that there was a gap in the system is not actually a lot of guidance for you to actually figure out how can I match what I see in the system to the attributes that I want to live up to. It's like I have this great strategy, I know the attributes I want to look for and I want to buy for, but I just have this crazy set of data right now and maybe some children's posters, and how do I figure out what actually matches what I want to do? And so that's really what our buyer's guide to carbon credit data quality is looking at, is figuring out how can we arm buyers with some actionable tools and some frameworks to go forward and look at this data landscape and figure out how do you source the data that is important for you to make your decision, how do you collate that together, and then how do you start analyzing it? And so matching it against the attributes that you want to select for. And so as a part of that, it's there's a couple of different things that's really important for data. So again, it's not just having data that's good. You really need to think about what are these dimensions of the data that you have and whether or not this is going to be helpful for you. And so there's one piece on data credibility, so the scientific validity of the data itself and whether or not you're actually getting important information on the performance of the credits. But you also really want to think about data efficiency. So how usable, how shareable, how easily accessible is this data? Because that becomes incredibly important for a number of different factors and the different steps you need to do, you need to take down the road. And it's also really important to think about the project governance as well. And so this is around, is this data that you're looking at actually independently verified? Are there ways that you're actually layering on other independent verifiers in the system so that you have greater trust in the robustness of the data? It's not coming just from a single source. And so I think we walk through a couple of these different tools and a couple of these different steps in order for buyers to really understand holistically, how do I actually work through processing all of the data that I need to do? I think unsurprisingly, when we walk through all of the steps, there's a lot that needs to be done. And one of the pieces is to make this really actionable, you really do need to leverage tools in the system to be able to simplify this process. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're so excited to be partnering and working with Centigrade, because this is exactly the sort of tool that allows you to be able to have the data in one place and in a format where it's easy to digest.
Yeah, I mean, everything that you said resonates, especially around attributes. We were talking about this earlier, about the ability to compare project types too. I mean, that's a dream when you have the right kind of quality of data to be able to look into a platform and see a side-by-side analysis of different projects, because a ton of CO2 is a ton of CO2. But there are different priorities that you as a buyer or investor are looking at that could mean that you're prioritizing a ton of CO2 in the global south as opposed to a ton of CO2 through reforestation in South Carolina, et cetera. So that's really helpful. We keep talking about the perspective of buyers, and I think we're kind of weighted on this side of the spectrum. But I do wonder, I mean, Centigrade, over the past year and a half where you've been kind of in this product development, you've also really focused on the role of the supplier and making their lives easier. Because, to be able to kind of package up all of this data, currently they need to jump through several hurdles, rather expensive ones. And so I wonder, maybe, James, if you can talk to us a little bit about, what is the supplier's role in making the lives of the buyers easier? How can they use something like Centigrade, and how can they make their data more efficient to make it more attractive to then put more capital into their projects?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, I've got some experience building marketplace businesses in the ads and e-commerce world. That's how I orient myself to this problem. And it's always the same, regardless of the industry. You deal with the chicken or egg challenge between demand and supply. As a company, we took a look at the problem, as is obvious, decided that data was kind of the main problem that needed to be solved, and decided to start on the supply side. So we've been very focused on building software for project developers to make it easier, as I said, for them to put themselves online, but then also make their data available to ecosystem participants, right, in a way that's beneficial to them, right? So I think one of the most important things is, historically, I think folks have looked or at least behaved in a way that suggests carbon credits are a commodity, right? Where you buy at one point in time and it is what it is. And our view is a carbon credit should kind of look and behave more like a bond, where it's tied to the performance of an underlying asset. And the way you do that is you provide longitudinal tracking of the project, right? So, folks currently put themselves online, posting PDFs or Excel sheets or Word docs or whatever, as I said, and it's like one snapshot in time, and then you don't really know what's happening with the project after that. And so one of the things that we've worked to do is to build tools to make it easy for projects to give us continuous updates on their data, so that data can then be shared with the market, right? Whether that's the service providers they work with to ultimately bring credits to market, or with the buyers themselves, right? So as a buyer, you're going to have a lot more confidence in a project where you can track the performance of the project over time, right? Understand what that asset is, and it's going to make it more likely that you want to buy it and likely want to buy more of it. And so we think that's an important innovation in the market.
Yeah, speaking of important innovations, I'd like to do a 6-month forecasting question. We've been so efficient with this conversation, almost as efficient as Centigrade. No, I'd love to do a 6-month forecasting question. So I really don't like when people say, magic wand, if you could change anything in the carbon markets, what would it be? The answer inevitably always comes back to more policy and regulation. So I'm going to challenge you. I don't think you would use it anyway, but I'm going to challenge you to not say policy and regulation. But if you're looking 6 months into the future, and it's a matter of forecasting, but also wishing. What would you like? We're looking at February 2025, around then, if my math is right. What would you, each of you, like to see happen as it relates to the carbon markets?
I like this magic wand power. For me, I think I'm still a conservationist at heart. I really do believe that we need a functioning voluntary carbon market system so we could get this critical financing towards really important climate action. And I think for me personally, I'm particularly excited about the types of climate action that have all of this additional social environmental impact tied to it, because I think that's really going to be what's necessary as we're working on building towards a more sustainable future. And I think one of the pieces that I'm incredibly excited about being able to work with Centigrade on is I believe that this type of tool, where we're really able to pull out standardized data and be able to really present it in a usable way, is actually going to unlock a lot more project potential, in particular from the types of projects that are not able to access the market now. So you could have really community-led, indigenous-led projects. They are not experienced project developers. And the current system now today means that it is such a high barrier to entry for you to figure out how do you even get your project in front of financiers or folks who are able to invest. And so I think that for me, in the short term, I would love to be able to see the ability for financing to get to these really critical projects. How could we make sure we have money flowing towards these communities, towards the global south, towards these projects that could really actually be impactful, not just for carbon, but for the broader planet as a whole?
James?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously the reason we're all here fundamentally is net zero 2050, right? I think we all recognize the importance of solving that problem. And there's no doubt that scope 1, 2, 3 is going to have to play the lead role in getting us there. But there's also no doubt that the voluntary carbon market is going to have to play a critical role as well. And so, I think for us, people, talk about the size of the VCM and, the fact that it's shrinking. The voluntary carbon market today, I'm not even sure it qualifies as a market, right? It's a cottage market. It's not a modern market. But if you recognize the fact that the voluntary carbon market or carbon credits are going to play a critical role in getting us to net zero 50, then the demand will be there. And so the question is there a high enough quality supply? And what we've observed over the last year is that there's plenty of high quality supply, right? They just have to be able to tell their story in a way that people can understand it and can track it. And if we enable folks to do that, then the demand will be there, and there's potential to 100x the market from what it is today. So I think my hope would be that people recognize that. They recognize the importance of carbon credits in getting us to net zero 2050, and that they recognize that there are lots and lots of high quality projects out there. I know all the rave has been engineered projects, and there's obviously a lot of great engineered projects, but there's actually a ton of great nature-based solutions out there as well, right? These folks just have to have an opportunity to share the data in a way that helps people understand what it is. And so if we can all continue to work towards that, then I have no doubt we'll be successful.
Great. Well, I think we are then at time. Thank you both for joining on stage and or up here and wherever. The Microsoft office. By the way, shout out Microsoft Sustainability. You're with Microsoft, right? Yes. Okay. Yeah. Microsoft Sustainability Program has been obviously very crucial to the carbon market. So thank you. And thank you, Dave and the GBBC team for allowing us to chat with you today.